They say empires are like rivers, always flowing, always changing, but always moving forward. But sometimes that flow can turn into a flood, and that's exactly what happened with one of history's greatest empires. So what if we told you that the British Empire was destroyed by money? Welcome to my channel. And today, let's find out how. An empire where the sun famously never set. Think about that. It covered a quarter of the world's land and ruled over nearly a quarter of its people. Yet, in what amounts to a single lifetime, this colossal power just unraveled. It's a cautionary tale that even the mightiest can fall, especially when they don't have enough money. Now here's the thing. Empires aren't just built on guns and gold. They're held together with an invisible thread we call money. The British Empire, at its peak, was the world's wealthiest beast. It milked its colonies dry, amassing fortunes that made London the Wall Street of its day. But empires, as we said, aren't immune to floods. This one got drenched. Imagine a global superpower on the winning side of 2 world wars, yet so broke it had to borrow staggering sums from its ally just to avoid going completely under. That's the Britain we're talking about, the post-war era. Britain emerged victorious, but the war had sucked the financial marrow out of the nation. The treasury was bleeding. How much? Well, strap in because the numbers are dizzying. By 1945, Britain's national debt had ballooned to over £26 billion. That's the modern-day equivalent of over $150 billion. For context, the entire U.S. budget for that year was just shy of $30 billion. So Britain's debt wasn't just big, it was staggering. It was as if the U.S. went to bed owing more money than it had ever borrowed in its entire history. And let's not forget the physical toll. Britain was a kingdom of rubble. Its cities were in sharp need of reconstruction, not to mention the human cost. The war had drained the country's manpower. Millions of men were missing, dead, wounded, or simply worn out from the long years of conflict. This wasn't just a financial crisis, it was a full-blown identity crisis. The war had stripped Britain down, both physically and metaphorically. It was a shell of its former self, clinging to the title of an empire on borrowed time. But here's the rub. The empire wasn't just bleeding money, it was hemorrhaging it. Think about the size of the British Empire, the sheer expanse of land and people it controlled. Now picture all that land, bleeding resources, wealth, and manpower to Britain. It was a steady drain that was slowly choking the empire. And as the 1940s wore on, that chokehold tightened. Enter India, a jewel in the crown, or rather the jewel that drained the crown. Britain had been milking India for centuries. It was the motherland's cash cow. But now the tables were turning. India, once a passive source of wealth, was demanding a cut. After the war, Indian leaders like Mahatma Gandhi weren't in the mood for compromise. They wanted independence. And they weren't asking nicely. Protests turned violent. The streets of India were a battleground, and the British Raj, as they called their rule in India, was in peril. Then came the last viceroy, Lord Mountbatten. He saw the writing on the wall. Independence was inevitable. So instead of fighting a losing battle, he played a card that few saw coming. On June 3, 1947, Mountbatten announced the end of an era. India would be split, not just into 2 separate states, but 3. India, Pakistan, and the princely state of Hyderabad. It was a hurried partition, a bandaged solution to a gaping wound. But why do we care about this? Because while Mountbatten was drawing borders on a map, he was also handing over a loaded gun. The gun was called Kashmir, and its trigger was pulled soon after. The first shots were fired, kicking off a conflict that would become a thorn in the side of the British Commonwealth for decades to come. Now fast forward to August 14, 1947. Midnight marked not just India's independence, but Pakistan's too. 2 separate states carved out of the same subcontinent. Why? Well, religion was the fault line. India would be predominantly Hindu, Pakistan Muslim. In essence, it was a religious carve-up. But here's where the financial floodgates open. Both countries were broke, deeply in debt, and saddled with a mountain of new problems. Pakistan, for instance, found itself with a whopping 20 million refugees on its hands, people who'd fled violence and were seeking safety. Where were they supposed to go? Where were they supposed to get money for food, shelter? The answer was India, their newly independent neighbor. Suddenly, Pakistan was burdened with feeding, clothing, and housing millions of people it wasn't prepared for. And that cost money, a lot of money. And then there was the British debt. When the Second World War wrapped up, Britain expected its empire to help repay the colossal war debts. The US was supposed to be the big lender, but here's the twist. As the war came to an end, America decided to cut bait. It didn't want to lend any more money, not to Britain, and certainly not to any of its empire remnants. It was a sudden shift, a slamming of the financial doors. And the reasons are varied. For starters, the US had its own post-war boom to worry about. It was basking in the glow of becoming a global superpower, and it didn't want anything to jeopardize that. Then there's the politics of it all. America and Britain, despite being allies, had differences. The US had been cautious about Britain's colonial baggage, seeing it as a potential roadblock in their shared future. The British Empire, with its hold on key regions like the Suez Canal, was in America's crosshairs. Washington wanted free access to these routes, something the British Empire wasn't keen on sharing. And finally, there was the Soviet Union breathing down their necks. As the Cold War's icy fingers began to curl around the world, America and Britain needed to present a united front. Lending money to a crumbling empire wasn't part of that plan. So where did that leave Britain? High and dry, much like an oasis that ran out of water. It was left holding the bag, saddled with debts it couldn't pay. The empire on which the sun never set was suddenly plunged into darkness. It was a dramatic fall from grace, and a clear sign that the age of empires was coming to a rather undignified end. In fact, the last official act of the British Empire was to bail out Egypt. But why Egypt? Well, Egypt was a critical piece in the post-war geopolitical puzzle. Control over the Suez Canal was a matter of life and death for any global superpower. For the US, it was a lifeline to crucial oil fields in the Middle East. For the Soviets, it was a route to the Mediterranean. And for Britain, it was a chance to cling to its imperial past. On November 29, 1956, Britain and France orchestrated a military operation in Egypt. Their target, the Suez Canal. But behind the scenes, the US was pulling strings. President Eisenhower was against the war. He put pressure on Britain, basically saying, back off if you know what's good for you. So what did Britain do? It handed over the canal to an international body. It was a symbolic end to its imperial ambitions. It was as if the British flag had been lowered for the last time over the palace walls. In essence, the British Empire was undone by the very forces it had nurtured. It created a monster that eventually turned on its creator. Now, imagine building an empire for centuries, ruling over distant lands and shaping the world in your image only to have it crumble within a few decades. That's what happened with the British. It's a stark reminder that no empire lasts forever. The sun may dim, the wealth may dwindle, and the colonies may rise. Today, the echoes of the British Empire resonate in subtle ways. The English language spoken across continents, the legal systems that mirror the mother country, and the cultural influence that continues to shape trends. But let's not be fooled. Those are the ghosts of an empire past. The real power lies elsewhere. The sun may have set on the British Empire, but it rises every day on new superpowers with new ambitions. The question is, will they heed the lessons of history, or are they destined to repeat it?